The clatter of hooves against hardened earth broke the morning silence as Zinnia Garland fled down the winding dirt road, her heart pounding harder than the stolen mare's gallop. Tears streaked down her bruised face, leaving clean trails through the dust coating her skin. Her left eye had nearly swollen shut from her father's final blow, the last she would ever receive from him if she had any say in the matter. The year was 1878, and at 22 years of age, Zinnia had finally found the courage to leave her family's homestead outside of Silver Creek, Colorado. 10 years of her father's drunken rages since her mother's death had left more than just physical marks. Each bruise told a story of survival, each scar a testament to her endurance. But last night had been different. Last night, he had threatened to kill her. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Zinnia pushed the mare harder, unsure of her destination but certain of one thing: anywhere was better than behind her. The thin calico dress she wore provided little protection against the chill of the early autumn morning, and the small bundle of belongings tied to the saddle represented everything she owned in the world. By midday, Silver Creek had faded into the distance, and Zinnia allowed the mare to slow to a walk. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Reaching into her bundle, she pulled out a small piece of bread she'd managed to grab before fleeing. It was stale and barely enough to quiet the hunger, but it would have to do. As the sun began its descent, Zinnia spotted a cluster of buildings in the distance. A town. Her heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. Would someone recognize her? Would her father have friends there who might force her to return? Despite her fears, she had little choice. The mare needed rest, and Zinnia needed shelter. The town sign read Fargo Creek, a small settlement she'd heard mentioned but had never visited. Relief washed over her. It was far enough from Silver Creek that her father's influence wouldn't reach here. As she rode down the main street, the curious stares of the townsfolk followed her. Zinnia knew what they saw: a young woman with a battered face, riding alone, looking desperate and afraid. She guided the mare to the town's small livery stable, dismounting with difficulty as her bruised ribs protested the movement. A stable hand, a boy no more than 15, approached cautiously. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his eyes widening as he took in her appearance. "I need to board my horse," Zinnia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "For a night, maybe longer. How much will it cost?" 50 cents a night, including feed, the boy replied, still staring at the purple bruise blossoming around her eye. Zinnia reached into her pocket and pulled out a few coins she'd saved over the years, hidden in a small pouch beneath the floorboards of her bedroom. It wasn't much, but it would have to last until she could find work. "Here," she said, handing him 50 cents. "Take good care of her." "She's carried me far today." The boy nodded, taking the reins. "There's a boarding house 2 buildings down if you're looking for a place to stay. Mrs. Peterson runs it. She's fair with her prices." Zinnia thanked him and gathered her small bundle. As she turned to leave, the boy called after her. "Miss, you might want to." He gestured awkwardly toward his own face, and Zinnia understood. Her bruises were drawing too much attention. She nodded, pulling her shawl up to partially cover her face before stepping back into the street. The boarding house wasn't hard to find. A 2-story building with white lace curtains in the windows and a small sign hanging from the porch. "Peterson's Boarding House, clean rooms, fair prices." Zinnia climbed the steps and knocked on the door, her heart in her throat. A plump, middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back into a tight bun opened the door. Her pleasant expression faltered when she took in Zinnia's appearance. "Yes?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I need a room, madam," Zinnia said, keeping her eyes downcast. "Just for a night or two." "The stable boy said you have fair prices." Mrs. Peterson hesitated, her eyes lingering on the portions of Zinnia's face visible beneath the shawl. For a moment, Zinnia thought she would be turned away, but then the woman's expression softened slightly. "It's $1 a night, including breakfast," she said. "Dinner's extra 50 cents. We serve at 6 sharp." "I can pay for the room," Zinnia replied, "but I'll manage without dinner." Mrs. Peterson frowned but nodded, opening the door wider to let her in. The interior of the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with a small sitting room to the right and a dining room to the left. "Room 3 is available, upstairs to the left," Mrs. Peterson said, accepting the $1 Zinnia offered. "There's a washroom at the end of the hall. Breakfast is at 7. We don't allow men in the rooms, and I expect my boarders to maintain decent hours." "Yes, madam," Zinnia replied. "Thank you." As she climbed the stairs, she could feel Mrs. Peterson's eyes on her back. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small wooden chair. Zinnia placed her bundle on the bed and sank down beside it, allowing herself to truly breathe for the first time that day. She was free, but what now? The money she had would last a week at most. She needed work, but who would hire a woman with a face like hers? Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment the weight of her situation threatened to crush her. Then, squaring her shoulders, Zinnia rose and moved to the washstand. She couldn't change her circumstances right now, but she could at least clean the dust from her skin. As the sun set over Fargo Creek, Zinnia lay in the narrow bed, her stomach empty but her resolve firm. Tomorrow would be another day, and perhaps it would bring something better than the day before. Morning came with the sound of movement in the house, and the smell of coffee wafting up the stairs. Zinnia dressed quickly in the one other dress she'd managed to bring, a faded blue cotton that had belonged to her mother. It was slightly too large, but it was clean and covered the bruises on her arms. When she entered the dining room, the other boarders, 2 elderly women, and a young man who appeared to be a clerk of some sort, fell silent, their eyes drawn to her battered face. Zinnia kept her head high as she took a seat at the far end of the table. Mrs. Peterson served a breakfast of porridge, toast, and coffee without comment, though her gaze lingered on Zinnia's bruises with a mixture of pity and curiosity. After breakfast, Zinnia set out to look for work. The town was small, but there had to be something: laundry, cleaning, anything that would allow her to earn enough to keep a roof over her head until she could figure out what to do next. The general store turned her away almost immediately, the proprietor's wife casting suspicious glances at her bruises. The same happened at the dressmaker's shop and the small hotel. By midday, Zinnia was beginning to despair. She had one more place to try: the town's only restaurant, a small establishment called the Prairie Rose. The owner, a harried-looking man with a sweaty face, looked her up and down skeptically. "We need help in the kitchen," he admitted. "But I can't have someone with a face like that serving customers." "I can work in the back," Zinnia said quickly. "I'm a hard worker, sir. I can cook, clean, whatever you need." The man hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. $4 a week, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You start tomorrow at 5 in the morning. It was barely enough to cover her room and board, but it was something. Zinnia thanked him and left, feeling a small measure of relief. She would have a job, at least for now. As she walked back toward the boarding house, a commotion near the livery stable caught her attention. A group of men had gathered around a large chestnut stallion, whose rider was attempting to control the prancing, agitated animal. The horse reared suddenly, and the crowd scattered. Zinnia paused, watching as the rider, a tall man in a dusty brown coat and wide-brimmed hat, spoke soothingly to the stallion, gradually bringing the animal under control. There was something in the way he handled the horse, with firmness but also gentleness that made her linger. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, patting the stallion's neck before handing the reins to the same stable boy who had helped Zinnia the day before. As he turned, his eyes met hers across the street. They were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, and for a moment, Zinnia couldn't look away. The man lifted his hat slightly in greeting, and Zinnia, flustered, hurried on toward the boarding house. She couldn't afford distractions, not when her situation was so precarious. That evening, as she sat alone in her room, the sound of voices drifted up from downstairs. Mrs. Peterson was speaking to someone at the door, her tone unusually warm. Zinnia couldn't make out the words, but a moment later, there were footsteps on the stairs. A knock sounded on her door. "Miss Garland," Mrs. Peterson called. "There's someone here to see you." Confused and wary, Zinnia opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson standing there with the man from the livery stable, the one with the blue eyes. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and the kind of weathered look that came from years under the open sky. "This is Mr. Quincy Porter," Mrs. Peterson said. "He says he has a proposition for you." Zinnia's guard went up immediately. She'd heard of propositions from men before, and they rarely meant anything decent. "What kind of proposition?" she asked cautiously. Quincy Porter removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Mrs. Peterson tells me you're looking for work," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I run a small ranch just outside of town. I'm in need of a housekeeper, someone to cook, clean, and generally keep things in order. The pay is $6 a week, plus room and board." Zinnia glanced at Mrs. Peterson, who nodded slightly, as if to say the offer was legitimate. Still, Zinnia hesitated. A ranch outside of town would be isolated, and she'd be alone with this man. "I've known Quincy Porter for 5 years," Mrs. Peterson said, as if reading Zinnia's thoughts. "He's a man of his word. The position is respectable." "Why me?" Zinnia asked, turning back to Porter. "You don't know anything about me." A flicker of something compassion perhaps crossed his face. "I need someone who won't be easily frightened by hard work or harsh conditions," he said. "And I suspect you're looking for a fresh start, away from whoever gave you those bruises." Zinnia's hand went instinctively to her face, and she looked away. "You don't have to tell me anything about your past," Porter continued. "It's none of my business, but the job is yours if you want it. You can always come back to town if it doesn't suit you." It was a risk, but what choice did she have? The restaurant job would barely keep her fed, and she'd be constantly exposed to the curious and judging eyes of the townspeople. At least at the ranch, she could heal in privacy. "When would I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if that's not too soon," Porter replied. "I'll come by with the wagon at 8. Zinnia nodded. "I'll be ready." After they left, Zinnia sat on the edge of her bed, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward a new life. Only time would tell. The next morning, true to his word, Quincy Porter arrived with a wagon at 8 o'clock sharp. Zinnia had already said goodbye to Mrs. Peterson, who had surprised her by refusing to take payment for the second night. "Consider it a good luck gift," the older woman had said. "And remember, if things don't work out, there's always a room here." The gesture had touched Zinnia more than she could express. It was the first kindness she'd been shown in a very long time. As Porter helped her up into the wagon, his movements were careful, as if he sensed that sudden gestures might startle her. Zinnia appreciated the consideration, even as she maintained her guard. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," Porter said as they set off. "Not a big operation, but it's mine. 50 head of cattle, a few horses, some chickens, and a vegetable garden that's been sorely neglected since my last housekeeper left to get married 3 months ago. How long have you had the ranch? Zinnia asked, more to fill the silence than out of real curiosity. Going on 6 years now, Porter replied. Bought it when it was little more than a shack and a few scrub acres. Been building it up since. He glanced at her. If you don't mind my asking, how'd you end up in Fargo Creek? Zinnia stiffened. You said my past wasn't your business. Porter nodded, turning his eyes back to the road. You're right, I apologize. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon bumping along the rutted trail that led away from town. The landscape opened up around them, rolling prairie dotted with clumps of trees. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still capped with snow even in early autumn. It's beautiful out here, Zinnia said softly, almost to herself. Porter nodded. That it is. Lonely sometimes, but beautiful. As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. It wasn't large, as Porter had said, but it was well tended. A sturdy cabin with a covered porch sat at the center, with a barn and several smaller outbuildings nearby. A corral held several horses, and beyond, Zinnia could see cattle grazing in the distance. This is Double P Ranch, Porter said, a note of pride in his voice. Not much compared to some, but it's home. As they pulled up to the cabin, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a large, shaggy brown and white animal that barked enthusiastically. That's Rusty, Porter said. Don't worry, he's friendly, just noisy. The dog circled the wagon as Porter helped Zinnia down, sniffing at her skirts with interest. After a moment, he seemed to decide she was acceptable and moved on to greet his master with joyful leaps. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a solid wooden table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the room. Through a doorway, Zinnia could see a bedroom, and a ladder led up to what appeared to be a loft. Your room is through there, Porter said, gesturing to another door. It's small but private. The previous housekeeper seemed comfortable enough. Zinnia set her bundle down and followed him to the door. The room was indeed small, just large enough for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a pitcher and basin. But it was clean, with a colorful quilt on the bed and curtains at the single window. It's fine, she said, turning back to Porter. When would you like me to start? Porter seemed slightly taken aback by her directness. Well, I suppose right away. Are you hungry? I could show you where everything is in the kitchen. That would be helpful, thank you. For the next hour, Porter showed Zinnia around the cabin, pointing out where supplies were kept, explaining the pump system he'd installed that brought water directly to the kitchen, and outlining his usual routine. He was organized and thorough, and Zinnia found herself thinking that working for him might not be as difficult as she'd feared. I usually have breakfast at sunrise, Porter said, dinner at midday when I can get back to the house, and supper around sunset. Nothing fancy needed. I'm not particular about food, just that it's hot and there's plenty of it. I can manage that, Zinnia replied. Good. Well, I'll leave you to settle in. I need to check on some fencing on the north side of the property. I should be back by midday. After Porter left, Zinnia explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was clean but showed the neglect of 3 months without a woman's touch. Dust had accumulated on the higher shelves, and the windows needed washing. The pantry was well stocked, though, and the garden, despite Porter's comment about neglect, still offered a decent selection of vegetables. By midday, Zinnia had swept the entire cabin, washed the windows in the main room, and prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and biscuits. The physical work had been a welcome distraction, keeping her mind off her situation and the uncertain future. When Porter returned, he paused in the doorway, taking in the cleaner space and the meal set out on the table. "You've been busy," he commented, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Just getting started," Zinnia replied, feeling oddly defensive. "There's still plenty to do." Porter washed his hands at the basin by the door, then sat down at the table. Zinnia served him a plate and then, after a moment's hesitation, served herself and sat across from him. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Porter spoke. "This is good," he said. "Been a while since I had a proper meal at midday." "Thank you," Zinnia replied, still not entirely comfortable with the situation. It felt strange to be sharing a meal with a man who wasn't her father, a man who, for all intents and purposes, was her employer and nothing more. "I hope you don't mind if I ask," Porter said carefully, "but those bruises, they're the reason you left wherever you came from, aren't they?" Zinnia set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "You said my past wasn't your business." "It's not," Porter agreed. "But I need to know if someone might come looking for you. Could cause trouble for both of us." It was a fair question, Zinnia had to admit. "My father," she said after a long pause. "He's been hurting me since my mother died 10 years ago. It got worse lately. I couldn't stay anymore." Porter's expression darkened. "I see." "He won't come looking for me," Zinnia added. "He'll be glad I'm gone. One less mouth to feed, one less burden to bear." Porter studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, you're safe here. No one's going to hurt you at Double P Ranch." "You have my word on that." The sincerity in his voice caught Zinnia off guard, and she felt a lump form in her throat. To hide her emotion, she stood and began clearing the table. "I should get back to work. There's still a lot to do." Porter didn't press the issue, rising from the table and putting on his hat. "I'll be back for supper," he said. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Garland." As the days passed, Zinnia settled into a routine at the ranch. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning and doing laundry, tended the garden in the afternoons, and prepared the evening meal before Porter returned from his day's work. The physical bruises on her face and body began to fade, though the emotional scars remained. Porter was a quiet employer, respectful of her space and privacy. He rarely asked personal questions after that first day, and he always announced himself before entering a room where she was working. Slowly, very slowly, Zinnia began to lower her guard around him. A week into her employment, a thunderstorm rolled in during the late afternoon. The sky darkened prematurely, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Zinnia was in the garden, hurriedly harvesting vegetables before the rain hit, when she saw Porter riding hard toward the cabin. He dismounted quickly, leading his horse into the barn. Moments later, he emerged, jogging toward her. "Storm's coming in fast," he called over the rising wind. "Let me help you get those inside." Together, they gathered the remaining vegetables and hurried to the cabin just as the first large raindrops began to fall. By the time they closed the door behind them, the rain was coming down in sheets, pounding against the roof and windows. "That was close," Porter said, setting the basket of vegetables on the table. He was soaked, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, his hair dripping water onto the floor. "You should change," Zinnia said, trying not to notice the way the wet fabric outlined his muscular frame. "I'll dry these vegetables and start on supper." Porter nodded and disappeared into his bedroom. While he was gone, Zinnia dried the vegetables and laid them out on the kitchen counter. The storm continued to rage outside, lightning flashing through the windows, followed by crashes of thunder that shook the cabin. When Porter returned, wearing a dry shirt and trousers, he found Zinnia standing at the window, watching the storm with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Not fond of thunderstorms? He asked, moving to stand beside her. They used to frighten me as a child, Zinnia admitted. My mother would hold me during storms, tell me stories to distract me from the thunder. It was the first time she'd voluntarily shared anything about her past, and the realization made her uncomfortable. She turned away from the window. I should start on supper. There's no rush, Porter said. The storm's going to last a while. Would you like some coffee? I could build up the fire a bit, take the chill off. The offer was tempting. The cabin had grown cool with the storm, and the idea of sitting by a warm fire with a cup of coffee was appealing. Zinnia nodded hesitantly. Porter added wood to the fire, coaxing it into a cheery blaze while Zinnia prepared the coffee. They sat in the two chairs by the fireplace, the storm raging outside, the warm fire crackling between them. You've done a fine job with the cabin, Porter said after a while. It hasn't looked this good since Mrs. Hollister left. Thank you, Zinnia replied, warming her hands on her coffee cup. It keeps me busy. Are you? Porter hesitated. Are you comfortable here? Is there anything you need that I haven't provided? The question touched her. It had been so long since anyone had concerned themselves with her comfort or needs. I'm fine, she said. You've been very fair. Porter nodded, his eyes on the fire. Good. That's good. A particularly loud crash of thunder made Zinnia jump, spilling a few drops of coffee onto her dress. Here, Porter said, handing her a handkerchief from his pocket. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Zinnia felt a strange flutter in her stomach. She dabbed at the coffee stains, acutely aware of Porter watching her. Where are you from originally, Miss Garland? He asked suddenly. If you don't mind my asking. Zinnia stiffened but then relaxed slightly. It was a harmless question. Silver Creek, she replied, about a day's ride from here. I've passed through there a few times, Porter said. Small place. Yes, very small, Zinnia agreed. Everyone knows everyone else's business. That's why I. She trailed off, realizing she was about to reveal more than she intended. Why you left, Porter finished for her. When Zinnia didn't respond, he continued. I understand wanting to leave a place where there are too many memories. That's why I came west from Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts back east. The admission surprised Zinnia. It was the first personal information Porter had shared with her. What happened? She asked before she could stop herself. Porter stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. Lost my family in a house fire. I was 19, working at a neighbor's farm when it happened. Mother, father, younger sister all gone in one night. I'm so sorry, Zinnia said softly, genuinely moved by his loss. Porter shrugged, but she could see the pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. 10 years now. But some days it feels like yesterday. The shared moment of vulnerability created a shift between them. A subtle change in the atmosphere. For the first time, Zinnia saw Porter not just as her employer, but as a person who had experienced his own share of pain and loss. As the storm began to subside, they prepared supper together, moving around the kitchen in a comfortable rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. The meal was simple beef stew and cornbread, but there was a warmth to the occasion that had nothing to do with the food. That night, lying in her bed listening to the rain still pattering on the roof, Zinnia realized that for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. The following weeks brought a gradual thawing in Zinnia's reserve. She began to relax more in Porter's presence, occasionally sharing small details about herself, her love of reading, her skill with a needle, the songs her mother had taught her. In return, Porter told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand the herd, and stories from his early days in the West. One sunny afternoon in late October, Zinnia was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Porter riding in with another man she didn't recognize. The stranger was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a grizzled beard and the weathered look of someone who had spent his life outdoors. "Miss Garland," Porter called as they dismounted. "This is Jasper McAllister. He owns the ranch that borders ours to the north." Zinnia nodded politely, suddenly conscious of her worn dress and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun. "Miss Garland," McAllister said, touching the brim of his hat. "Quincy here has been singing your praises. Says you've transformed his bachelor quarters into a proper home." Zinnia flushed, glancing at Porter, who looked slightly embarrassed. "Mr. Porter exaggerates," she said. "I've only done what any housekeeper would do." "Well, it's more than that old grump deserved," McAllister said with a chuckle. "Always thought what he needed was a woman's touch around here." Porter cleared his throat. "We're going to discuss some business in the house, Miss Garland. Would it be possible to have some coffee?" "Of course," Zinnia replied, relieved for the excuse to escape McAllister's scrutiny. "I'll bring it in as soon as it's ready." As she prepared the coffee in the kitchen, she could hear the men's voices from the main room discussing cattle prices and the upcoming winter. When she carried the tray in, McAllister was midway through a story about a mutual acquaintance. "So there's Ben, trying to explain to his wife why he's coming home at dawn smelling like whiskey and wearing another man's boots," McAllister concluded with a laugh. Porter chuckled, accepting the cup Zinnia offered him. "Thank you, Miss Garland." McAllister's eyes lingered on Zinnia as she served him, particularly on the fading yellowish bruise near her temple, the last visible reminder of her father's abuse. Zinnia turned away quickly, but not before she saw the man's expression change from curiosity to something like understanding. "Miss Garland," McAllister said as she turned to leave. "If you don't mind my saying, it's good to see Quincy with someone taking care of him. Man's been alone too long." "I'm just the housekeeper, Mr. McAllister," Zinnia said firmly, her cheeks warming. Of course," the older man said, but there was a knowing look in his eye that made Zinnia uncomfortable. After McAllister left, Porter found Zinnia in the garden, kneeling among the last of the season's vegetables. "I apologize for Jasper," he said. "He means well, but he's got no filter between his brain and his mouth." Zinnia stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "It's all right. I just wouldn't want him spreading the wrong idea in town. About us, I mean." Porter's expression was unreadable. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications Zinnia wasn't ready to confront. "I should finish gathering these vegetables before the first frost comes," she said, turning away. Porter didn't press the issue, but as he walked back toward the barn, Zinnia felt a confusing mixture of relief and disappointment. That evening, as Zinnia was preparing supper, Porter came in from the barn carrying a small wooden box. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said, setting the box on the table. "Found them stored away and forgotten." Curious, Zinnia opened the box to find several books, worn but well cared for volumes of poetry, a few novels, and a collection of folk tales. "They were my mother's," Porter explained. "I brought them west with me but haven't had much time for reading. Thought you might like to borrow them." Touched by the gesture, Zinnia ran her fingers over the embossed cover of a book of Tennyson's poetry. "Thank you," she said softly. "I haven't had a new book to read in years." "They're not new," Porter said, "but they're yours to enjoy for as long as you like." That night, Zinnia read by lamplight in her small room, losing herself in the beauty of Tennyson's words. It was a luxury she had almost forgotten, the simple pleasure of reading for enjoyment rather than necessity. As she finally closed the book and prepared for sleep, she realized with a start that she had gone the entire day without once thinking about her father or the life she had left behind. The first snowfall came in early November, transforming the landscape overnight into a pristine white expanse. Zinnia woke to find the world outside her window blanketed in snow, the early morning sunlight making it sparkle like diamonds. Porter was already up, building the fire higher against the chill that had settled in the cabin. When Zinnia emerged from her room, wrapped in her shawl, he looked up with a smile. "First snow," he said. "Always makes the world look clean, doesn't it?" Zinnia nodded, moving to the stove to begin preparing breakfast. "It's beautiful," she agreed, "though I imagine it makes your work harder." "It does," Porter said, "but we're prepared. The cattle have been moved to the sheltered pastures, and there's plenty of hay stored in the barn. We should weather the winter just fine." The casual "we" didn't escape Zinnia's notice, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the growing fire. Over the past weeks, she had begun to feel like a part of something here, not just an employee but someone who belonged. Breakfast was a simple affair of oatmeal, bacon, and coffee, but they lingered over it longer than usual, watching through the window as the world awoke to its snowy covering. Porter seemed in no hurry to begin his day's work, and Zinnia found she enjoyed his company more than she cared to admit. "I need to ride into town today," Porter said eventually. "We're low on some supplies and I want to get them before the snow gets any deeper. Would you like to come along? Might be nice for you to get out of the cabin for a while." The invitation surprised her. Since coming to the ranch, Zinnia had not returned to Fargo Creek, content to remain isolated and safe. The thought of facing the townspeople, with their curious stares and whispered comments, made her uneasy. But Porter was right, it would be good to get out, and the snow would provide a reason for bundling up, concealing her identity somewhat. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "I would like that, thank you." Porter hitched the wagon while Zinnia put on her warmest clothes, a woolen dress, her shawl, and a bonnet that helped shield her face. The ride into town was cold but invigorating, the snow crunching beneath the wagon wheels, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Fargo Creek looked different in the snow, somehow smaller and cozier. As they pulled up in front of the general store, Zinnia felt a flutter of nervousness. What if someone recognized her from her brief stay at the boarding house? What if they asked questions she wasn't ready to answer? Porter seemed to sense her unease. "We'll be quick," he said. "Just the essentials today." Inside the store, the warmth of the wood stove and the familiar smells of coffee, leather, and spices created a welcoming atmosphere. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Porter by name. "Mr. Porter, haven't seen you in a few weeks. Stocking up before the real winter hits, are you?" "That's the plan, Mr. Simmons," Porter replied. "Need flour, sugar, coffee, and whatever dry goods you'd recommend for the coming months." While Porter discussed supplies with the shopkeeper, Zinnia wandered through the store, examining the bolts of fabric, the jars of candy, the shelves of canned goods. It had been a long time since she'd been in a general store without her father looming over her, dictating what she could and couldn't look at. She was examining a display of hair ribbons when a woman's voice behind her made her jump. Well, if it isn't Quincy Porter's mysterious housekeeper. Zinnia turned to find a well-dressed woman in her 30s watching her with undisguised curiosity. The woman's gaze lingered on the fading bruise near Zinnia's temple, and her painted lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Vivian Taylor," she said. "My husband owns the bank here in Fargo Creek. I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Zinnia Garland," Zinnia replied stiffly, wishing she could disappear into the floor. "Ah, yes, there have been quite a few rumors about you, Miss Garland." A young woman, showing up in town with Bruises, then whisked away to Quincy Porter's ranch. "It's quite the tale." Before Zinnia could respond, Porter appeared at her side. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his tone polite but cool. "Always a pleasure." "Quincy," Vivian replied with a familiarity that made Zinnia's stomach tighten inexplicably. "I was just introducing myself to your housekeeper." The slight pause before housekeeper carried implications that made Zinnia flush with anger and embarrassment. "Miss Garland is indeed my housekeeper," Porter said evenly, "and a valued employee. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have several more stops to make before the weather worsens." Taking Zinnia's elbow gently, he guided her away from Vivian Taylor and toward the counter where his purchases were being wrapped. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, large flakes drifting lazily from a pewter sky. Zinnia climbed into the wagon without a word, her cheeks burning despite the cold. "I apologize for Vivian Taylor," Porter said as they pulled away from the store. "She's the town gossip, always looking for new fodder for her sewing circle." "She seemed quite familiar with you," Zinnia said before she could stop herself. Porter glanced at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Vivian's been trying to match me with every eligible woman in the county since her husband and I did some business together last year. I've made it clear I'm not interested, but she's persistent." The explanation shouldn't have relieved Zinnia as much as it did, and she quickly redirected the conversation. "What rumors was she talking about? About me, I mean." Porter's expression darkened. "Nothing worth repeating." "Small town talk, that's all." But Zinnia could guess. A young woman with bruises, living alone with a bachelor rancher, it didn't take much imagination to conjure the whispers that must be circulating through Fargo Creek. "Perhaps it was a mistake for me to come to town," she said quietly. "No," Porter said firmly. "You have every right to go where you please. Don't let someone like Vivian Taylor make you feel otherwise." The conviction in his voice surprised her. For so long, Zinnia had been told where she could go, what she could do, who she could speak to. The idea that she had rights, that she deserved to take up space in the world, was still a novel concept. They completed their errands, quickly stopping at the post office and the feed store before heading back to the ranch. The snow was falling more heavily now, creating a white curtain around them as they made their way out of town. "Looks like we're in for a real storm," Porter said, his eyes on the thickening clouds ahead. "Good thing we got those supplies when we did." As they drove, the wind picked up, swirling the snow around them until it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Porter leaned forward, squinting against the white onslaught. "Can you make out the trail?" Zinnia asked, concern edging her voice. "Just barely," Porter admitted. "But I know these lands well enough. We'll be fine." Despite his reassurance, the journey back to the ranch took twice as long as the trip into town. By the time the cabin came into view, they were both half frozen and the horses were straining against the growing drifts. Porter helped Zinnia down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. In the swirling snow, with his face close to hers, Zinnia felt a sudden urge to lean into him, to seek the warmth and security he represented. The feeling startled her and she pulled away abruptly. "I'll get the fire going," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "You should see to the horses." Inside, as Zinnia built up the fire and unpacked the supplies, she tried to make sense of her reaction. Was it simply gratitude she felt toward Porter? Appreciation for his kindness and respect? Or was it something deeper, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge? That evening, as the storm raged outside, they sat by the fire drinking coffee laced with a splash of whiskey to ward off the chill, as Porter put it. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind, but inside, it was warm and surprisingly cozy. "I hope you didn't mind too much coming to town today," Porter said after a while. Despite Mrs. Taylor, Zinnia smiled faintly. It was good to get out to see something besides these four walls, and the snow, it made everything look different, cleaner somehow. That's one way of looking at it, Porter agreed. He hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to tell you, Miss Garland. Your bruises, they're nearly gone now. Zinnia's hand went to her temple, where the last of the yellowish discoloration was fading. Yes, she said softly. Finally. You look. Porter paused, seemingly searching for the right word. You look more at peace than when you first came here, I mean. The observation was accurate. Over the past weeks, Zinnia had felt a gradual lifting of the weight she had carried for so long, the constant fear, the anticipation of pain, the shame of her situation. Here, in this small cabin on the edge of nowhere, she had found a measure of safety and even, surprisingly, contentment. I am, she admitted. I feel different here, like I can breathe. Porter nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I'm glad. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl around the cabin. Then Porter spoke again, his voice quieter. You know, when I first saw you in town that day with your bruises and that look in your eyes like a hunted animal, I knew what you were running from. Not the details, but the essence of it. Zinnia stiffened slightly. How could you know? I've seen it before, Porter said. My mother. My father wasn't always a kind man, especially when he drank, which was often. The revelation stunned her, but you said they died in a fire. They did, Porter confirmed, but before that there were years of difficulty. My mother bore the brunt of his temper. I was too young to stop it, though I tried, once I was old enough to understand what was happening. I'm sorry, Zinnia said, truly meaning it. Porter shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. It's why I noticed your bruises right away, and why I offered you the job, I thought. I thought maybe you deserved a chance, to be safe, to heal, like my mother never got. The admission touched Zinnia deeply. All this time, she had wondered why Porter had taken a chance on her, a battered, desperate stranger. Now she understood. It wasn't just kindness. It was a form of redemption, a way of helping someone in a situation he couldn't change for his own mother. Thank you, she said simply, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Porter met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared pain and the possibility of healing. For a breathless moment, Zinnia thought he might reach for her hand, or say something more. Then Rusty, who had been sleeping by the fire, let out a loud snore, breaking the tension. Porter smiled, the spell broken. I should check the barn one more time before turning in. Make sure everything's secure against this storm. As he donned his coat and hat, Zinnia remained by the fire, contemplating the new understanding between them. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, she had a fresh cup of coffee waiting for him. All's well out there, he reported, accepting the cup gratefully. But we're in for a long night. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. That night, as Zinnia lay in her bed listening to the wind moan around the corners of the cabin, she felt a curious sense of anticipation, as if she were standing on the threshold of something important. Sleep was elusive, her mind too full of the day's revelations, of Porter's quiet strength, of the growing feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, her flight from Silver Creek had led her not just to safety, but to something she had never dared to hope for. The storm lasted 3 days, blanketing the ranch in several feet of snow and effectively cutting them off from town. Porter spent hours each day clearing paths to the barn and outbuildings, checking on the livestock and bringing in firewood. Zinnia kept the cabin warm and welcoming, preparing hearty meals and ensuring that hot coffee was always ready when Porter came in from the cold. On the 4th day, the sun emerged from behind the clouds, turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white expanse. Porter announced at breakfast that he needed to check the cattle in the far pastures, a task that would take most of the day. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Of course," Zinnia replied. "I have plenty to keep me busy." After Porter left, Zinnia tackled the indoor chores with vigor, eager to keep her mind and hands occupied. She was in the midst of kneading dough for bread when a knock at the door startled her. Wiping her hands on her apron, she approached the door cautiously. Porter wouldn't knock at his own cabin, and it was unlikely that anyone from town had made it through the deep snow. "Who is it?" she called, her heart racing. "Jasper McAllister, miss," came the reply. "Just checking to make sure you and Quincy weathered the storm all right." Relieved, Zinnia opened the door to find the grizzled rancher standing on the porch, his horse visible behind him in the yard. "Mr. McAllister," she greeted him. "Please come in. Mr. Porter is checking on the cattle, but he should be back by evening." McAllister removed his hat as he entered, his eyes taking in the warm, tidy cabin. "Looks like you've been managing just fine," he observed. "Better than most of us old bachelors, that's for certain." Zinnia offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully, sitting at the kitchen table while she returned to her bread dough. "How bad was the storm out your way?" she asked, mainly to be polite. "Lost a few head of cattle that wandered into a gully and got caught in the snow," McAllister replied. "But the main herd's fine. Been ranching too long to let a little blizzard catch me by surprise." Zinnia nodded, continuing to knead the dough. She could feel McAllister watching her, and it made her uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke again. "Miss Garland, hope you don't mind me saying so, but you've been good for Quincy. Haven't seen him this settled in all the years I've known him." Zinnia felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. McAllister," the old rancher chuckled. "If you say so, miss. But I've known Quincy Porter since he first came west, a green boy with more determination than sense. He's a good man, one of the best, and he's been alone too long." "Mr. Porter's personal life is none of my business," Zinnia said firmly, though her heart was racing. "Maybe not," McAllister conceded, sipping his coffee. "But I've seen the way he looks at you, and I've been around long enough to know when two people are dancing around what's right in front of them." Before Zinnia could formulate a response, the sound of hoofbeats outside announced Porter's early return. McAllister grinned, as if the timing confirmed his point. "Well, I'll be on my way," he said, rising from the table. "Just wanted to make sure my neighbors were all right after the storm." Porter entered just as McAllister was putting on his hat. The two men greeted each other with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. "Jasper, wasn't expecting to see you out this way today." "Just being neighborly," McAllister replied with a wink that Zinnia pretended not to see. "Miss Garland's been keeping me company while I warmed up. You're a lucky man, Quincy, having such a fine housekeeper." Porter glanced at Zinnia, who busied herself with the bread dough, refusing to meet his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know." After McAllister left, an awkward silence fell between them. Zinnia continued working on the bread, acutely aware of Porter moving around the cabin, removing his coat and boots, warming his hands by the fire. "You're back early," she said finally, just to break the silence. "The eastern pastures were blocked by drifts," Porter explained. "I'll try again tomorrow, maybe approach from the south." Zinnia nodded, still not looking at him. McAllister's words echoed in her mind. "I've seen the way he looks at you. Was it true?" Had Porter developed feelings for her beyond those of an employer for his housekeeper? And if so, what did she feel in return? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswerable and unsettling. For so long, Zinnia had focused solely on survival, escaping her father, finding safety, securing a means to support herself. The possibility of something more of connection, of affection, of perhaps even love had seemed so remote as to be laughable. Yet here it was, hovering just beyond her reach, frightening and enticing in equal measure. Porter moved to stand beside her at the table, watching as she shaped the dough into loaves. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice warm. "No, thank you," Zinnia replied, acutely aware of his proximity. "I'm nearly finished." Porter nodded but didn't move away. "What did Jasper want?" he asked after a moment. "Just to check that we were all right after the storm," Zinnia said, focusing intently on the bread dough. "He said he lost a few cattle but otherwise weathered it well." Porter murmured, and Zinnia could feel his eyes on her profile. "And did he say anything else? Jasper's not usually one for short visits or brief conversations." Zinnia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He mentioned that you've been alone too long. That I've been good for you, whatever that means." She risked a glance at Porter and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what do you think about that?" he asked quietly. "I think." Zinnia began, then faltered. What did she think? That in the short time she'd been at the ranch, something had changed between them. That despite her best efforts to maintain a professional distance, she found herself drawn to this quiet, decent man who had offered her safety when she needed it most. "I think Mr. McAllister is a well-meaning busybody," she said finally, returning to her bread dough. "And that he shouldn't make assumptions about things he doesn't understand." Porter was silent for a long moment, and Zinnia feared she had offended him. Then, gently, he placed his hand over hers, stilling her movements. "Zinnia," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly, and found his blue eyes fixed on hers with a warmth that made her heart race. "Jasper's right about one thing," Porter said. "You have been good for me, better than you know." Zinnia swallowed hard, uncertain how to respond. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat behind the safety of formality and distance. But another part, a part that had been silent for too long, wanted to lean into his touch, to acknowledge the feeling growing between them. "I should put the bread in the oven," she said instead, her voice barely audible. Porter held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and stepped back. "Of course," he said. "I'll go bring in some more firewood." As he left the cabin, Zinnia let out a shaky breath. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering between the safety of what she knew and the uncertainty of what might be. And for the first time in her life, the unknown didn't terrify her. The days following the storm brought a gradual thaw, both in the weather and in the atmosphere between Zinnia and Porter. Though nothing more was said about Jasper McAllister's visit or his insinuations, there was a new awareness between them, a heightened consciousness of each other's presence, a lingering of gazes, a careful dance of approach and retreat. December arrived, bringing with it thoughts of Christmas. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Porter broached the subject. "I usually go into town for Christmas Day," he said. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house hosts a dinner for those without family nearby. Would you like to join me this year?" The invitation caught Zinnia off guard. Christmas had never been a joyous occasion in her household, not since her mother died. Her father had usually drunk himself into a stupor, leaving Zinnia to mark the day alone and in silence. I don't know," she replied honestly. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly in years." "All the more reason to do so now," Porter said gently. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, we could stay here, have our own celebration." The idea appealed to Zinnia more than she expected, a quiet Christmas at the ranch, just the two of them. "I'd like that," she said softly. Porter's smile warmed her more than the fire. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll need a tree, of course. There's a stand of pines on the north edge of the property. We could ride out tomorrow and choose one if you'd like." The next day dawned clear and cold, the snow sparkling under a brilliant blue sky. After breakfast, Porter saddled 2 horses, his chestnut stallion and a gentle mare for Zinnia. It had been years since she had ridden properly, not just fleeing on a stolen horse, and she was nervous as Porter helped her mount. "She's steady," he assured her, adjusting the stirrups. "Just relax and let her do the work." They rode north through the snow-covered pastures, Zinnia gradually growing more confident in the saddle. The landscape was breathtaking, rolling white hills, skeletal trees etched against the sky, and in the distance, the mountains rising like sentinels. "It's beautiful," Zinnia said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "It is," Porter agreed, but when she glanced over, he was looking at her, not the landscape. They found the pine trees easily, a small grove nestled in a sheltered valley. Porter dismounted and helped Zinnia down, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the trees. "Which one catches your eye?" Zinnia wandered among the pines, their scent sharp and clean in the cold air. Finally, she stopped before a tree of medium height, its branches full and symmetrical. "This one," she said. "It's perfect." Porter nodded approvingly and set to work with the axe he had brought. As he chopped, Zinnia watched, struck by the fluid strength of his movements, the determined set of his jaw. He was a handsome man, she realized, not in the flashy way of the young men who had occasionally caught her eye in Silver Creek, but in a more substantial, enduring way. When the tree fell with a soft thud into the snow, Porter turned to her with a grin that made her heart skip. "First Christmas tree I've cut in years," he admitted, securing the pine to the side of his saddle. "Never seemed worth the effort just for myself." The simple statement reminded Zinnia of how isolated Porter's life had been, how isolated they both had been, in their different ways. Yet here they were, preparing to celebrate Christmas together, creating something new amidst the echoes of old pain. Back at the cabin, they set up the tree in a corner of the main room. Porter produced a box of ornaments from the attic, glass balls, wooden figures, and handmade decorations that had belonged to his mother. Together, they adorned the tree, their hands occasionally brushing, their laughter filling the cabin with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "It's beautiful," Zinnia said when they were finished, stepping back to admire their work. Porter stood beside her, his shoulder just touching hers. "It is," he agreed. "Best tree I've ever had." That evening, after Zinnia retired to her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, contemplating the changes in her life. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in her father's house, enduring his abuse, seeing no way out. Now, here she was, preparing for Christmas with a man who treated her with kindness and respect, in a place where she felt safe and valued. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude and a cautious hope. Perhaps it was possible, after all, to rebuild a life from the ashes of the old one. Perhaps she could find not just safety, but happiness. As Christmas approached, the ranch took on a festive atmosphere. Zinnia baked cookies and made garlands of popcorn and cranberries to hang around the cabin. Porter seemed to find excuses to be at the house more often, sometimes helping with her preparations, sometimes just sitting by the fire watching her work. On Christmas Eve, a light snow began to fall, adding to the magical feeling of the day. Porter returned from checking on the livestock with a mysterious smile. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small, wrapped package from his coat pocket. "But it's not Christmas yet," Zinnia protested, though she couldn't help the flutter of excitement in her chest. "Consider it an early gift," Porter replied, placing the package in her hands. "Go ahead, open it. With trembling fingers, Zinnia unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found blank pages, a journal. "I noticed you writing sometimes, on scraps of paper," Porter explained. "Thought you might like something proper to write in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Zinnia deeply. She had indeed been writing poems, thoughts, fragments of memory as a way of processing her past and present. That Porter had noticed and understood what it meant to her spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." "There's something else," Porter said, reaching into his pocket again. This time he withdrew a small silver locket on a delicate chain. "This belonged to my mother. I've kept it all these years, but I'd like you to have it now." Zinnia's breath caught. "Quincy, I couldn't, it's too precious, a family heirloom." "That's why I want you to have it," Porter said quietly. "Because you've become important to me, Zinnia, more important than I ever expected." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Zinnia felt tears prick her eyes as Porter moved closer, the locket dangling from his fingers. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to place it around her neck. Wordlessly, Zinnia nodded, turning so he could fasten the chain. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, sending shivers down her spine. When she turned back to face him, they were standing very close, his blue eyes searching hers. "Zinnia," he began, his voice low and earnest. "I know you came here looking for safety, not anything else. And I've tried to respect that, to give you the space and time you needed to heal. But I can't pretend anymore that my feelings for you are simply those of an employer." Zinnia's heart raced. Part of her wanted to flee, to retreat from the vulnerability of the moment. But a stronger part, the part that had been slowly healing, gradually trusting, held her in place. "What are you saying, Quincy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you," Porter replied simply. "Not just because you're beautiful, though you are. Not just because you're strong, though God knows you're the strongest person I've ever met. But because of who you are, your kindness, your courage, the way you face each day with determination despite everything you've been through." The words washed over Zinnia like a warm tide, filling spaces inside her she hadn't known were empty. No one had ever spoken to her this way, seen her this way, not as a victim, not as a burden, but as someone worthy of admiration and love. "I don't expect anything from you," Porter continued when she remained silent. "I just wanted you to know, and to tell you that whatever you decide, whether you stay as my housekeeper, or as something more, or whether you choose to leave and make your own way elsewhere, I will support you. Because your happiness matters to me." Tears spilled down Zinnia's cheeks now, unchecked. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I never thought, never imagined that anyone could love me, not after everything." Porter reached up gently, brushing a tear from her face. "The bruises your father gave you," he said softly, "they were never your shame to carry. They were his. All they ever proved about you was your incredible strength, your ability to survive, to endure." It was as if he had reached inside her and touched the deepest wound, the belief, buried so deep she had hardly recognized it herself, that she was somehow tainted by her father's abuse, less worthy of love because of it. To hear Porter say otherwise, to know that he saw her bruises not as a mark of shame but as evidence of her courage, broke something open inside her. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to trust, afraid to hope, afraid that if I let myself love you, something will go wrong." "I know," Porter said gently. "And I'm not asking for an answer now, just for you to know how I feel and to consider the possibility that there might be more for both of us than we ever dared to hope for." He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "Merry Christmas, Zinnia," he said softly, turning to go. "Wait," Zinnia said, reaching for his hand. "I have something for you too." She went to her room and returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much," she said apologetically. Porter unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue, a project she had worked on secretly during the long evenings by the fire. "I noticed your old one was fraying," Zinnia explained. "And the blue, it matches your eyes." Porter ran his fingers over the scarf, clearly moved by the gesture. "It's perfect," he said. "Thank you." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, despite the warmth of the cabin. "How does it look?" he asked, smiling. "Handsome," Zinnia replied before she could stop herself, then blushed deeply. Porter's smile widened. "The best gift I've received in years," he said, "and from the best person I've known." Later that night, as Zinnia lay in her bed listening to the soft fall of snow against the window, she reflected on Porter's words. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider the possibility of a future with him, not as his housekeeper, but as his partner, his wife. The thought no longer terrified her as it once would have. Instead, it filled her with a tentative hope. Her father had tried to break her spirit, to convince her she was worthless. But here, in this small cabin on the edge of the prairie, Zinnia had found something she'd thought forever lost her own value, reflected in the eyes of a man who saw her not for her bruises, but for her strength in surviving them. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the fresh snow glittering in the morning sunlight. Zinnia rose early, filled with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. After Porter's declaration the previous evening, everything felt different, charged with possibility. She prepared a special breakfast, cinnamon rolls she had set to rise the night before, eggs, bacon, and coffee. The scent filled the cabin, warm and inviting. When Porter emerged from his bedroom, he paused in the doorway, taking in the scene: the decorated tree, the table set with the best dishes, Zinnia in her nicest dress with his mother's locket around her neck. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Zinnia," he replied, his eyes warm. "Everything looks wonderful." They ate breakfast together, the conversation easy despite the undercurrent of emotion between them. Afterward, they exchanged their remaining gifts: a pair of leather gloves from Zinnia, a beautiful shawl from Porter. "There's one more thing," Porter said as they sat by the fire, the remains of their Christmas dinner cleared away. "Something I've been wanting to show you." He led her outside, where the afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow. A sleigh stood waiting, hitched to his chestnut stallion. "I borrowed it from Jasper," Porter explained. "Thought you might enjoy a ride around the property." The sleigh was small, just large enough for two people, with a thick buffalo robe laid across the seat for warmth. Porter helped Zinnia up, then climbed in beside her, taking the reins. With a gentle flick, they were off, gliding across the snow with a smooth, almost magical motion. Zinnia laughed in delight as they curved around the house and across the open field beyond. The cold air nipped at her cheeks, but the buffalo robe and Porter's solid warmth beside her kept her comfortable. "It's wonderful," she said, her eyes bright with joy. "I've never ridden in a sleigh before." "First time for everything," Porter replied, his smile matching hers. He guided the sleigh toward a stand of trees at the edge of the property, where the late afternoon sun broke through the branches in golden shafts. As they came to a stop in the shelter of the trees, Porter turned to Zinnia. "I brought you here for a reason," he said, his expression growing serious. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch. In spring, it's filled with wildflowers. In summer, the shade makes it the coolest place to rest. In autumn, the leaves turn every shade of gold and red, and now in winter. It's like a fairy tale," Zinnia finished for him, gazing up at the snow-laden branches, the sunlight filtering through them. "Exactly," Porter said. "I've always thought that if I ever, If I ever ask someone to share my life, this is where I do it." Zinnia's heart began to race as Porter took her gloved hands in his. "Zinnia Garland," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I meant what I said last night. I love you, not in spite of your past, but including it because it made you who you are today. And I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the crisp winter air, momentous and life-changing. Zinnia looked into Porter's eyes and saw everything she had ever wanted but never believed she could have: respect, admiration, and most of all, love. Not the possessive, controlling love her father had claimed while hurting her, but a love that sought her happiness, that valued her freedom and choice. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm not. I haven't always been." "I'm sure," Porter interrupted gently. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, but you don't have to answer now. Take all the time you need." Zinnia looked around at the winter wonderland surrounding them, then back at Porter, at this man who had offered her safety when she needed it most, and who now offered her a future beyond anything she had dared to imagine. "I don't need time," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "My answer is yes. Yes, I will marry you, Quincy Porter." The joy that spread across Porter's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Zinnia didn't pull away. Instead, she closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. When they parted, Porter's eyes were shining. "I promise you, Zinnia," he said softly, "that you will never again have to fear being hurt by someone who should love you. Our home will be a place of safety, of respect, of joy." "I know," Zinnia replied, and she did know. In the months since she had arrived at the ranch, battered and afraid, Porter had shown her daily what true kindness looked like. He had welcomed her because of her bruises, not in spite of them, seeing in them evidence of her courage, her resilience. And in doing so, he had helped her see those qualities in herself. They rode back to the cabin as the sun set, casting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The future stretched before them, bright with promise, and for the first time in her life, Zinnia faced it without fear. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Fargo Creek. Some, like Jasper McAllister, received it with unconcealed delight. Others, like Vivian Taylor, with barely disguised disapproval. But Zinnia found that she cared less about the town's opinion than she would have expected. What mattered was the life she and Porter were building together, a life founded on mutual respect and genuine love. They were married in early spring, when the first wildflowers were beginning to dot the prairie. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch, with Jasper McAllister serving as witness and Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house attending as Zinnia's chosen family. Zinnia wore a new dress of pale blue, with Porter's mother's locket around her neck and flowers in her hair. As they exchanged vows under the same trees where Porter had proposed, Zinnia felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. She had arrived at the ranch broken and afraid, carrying the visible and invisible wounds of her past. Now she stood there as a bride, still carrying those scars but no longer defined by them. "I, Quincy, take you, Zinnia, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Porter said, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Zinnia repeated the vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the darkest night of her life, fleeing her father's house, bruised and terrified, to the brightest day, pledging her life to a man who had shown her what love truly meant. The years that followed were not without challenges. Running a ranch in the wild Colorado territory, demanded hard work, resilience, and courage qualities both Zinnia and Porter had in abundance. There were harsh winters, dry summers, cattle lost to disease or predators. But through it all, they faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. In their second year of marriage, Zinnia gave birth to a son they named James, after Porter's father a reclaiming of the name, a chance to associate it with love instead of fear. 2 years later, a daughter followed whom they named Lily, after Zinnia's mother. Both children grew strong and happy, secure in the love of their parents and the stability of their home. The Double P Ranch prospered under their care, gradually expanding as they acquired neighboring land. Porter's skill with horses became well known in the territory, bringing buyers from as far away as Denver. Zinnia, meanwhile, found an unexpected talent for business, keeping the ranch's books and negotiating sales with a shrewdness that impressed even the most experienced cattlemen. But perhaps their greatest achievement was less tangible. In a time and place where domestic violence was often overlooked or accepted, the Porter household stood as an example of what marriage could and should be: a partnership of equals, founded on respect and genuine affection. 10 years after their wedding, on a warm summer evening, Zinnia sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Porter teach 7-year-old James to rope a post. 5-year-old Lily sat beside her, practicing her letters in a small notebook. From this vantage point, Zinnia could see all that they had built together: the thriving ranch, the happy children, the life that had once seemed impossible. Porter looked up from his lesson with James and caught her eye, smiling in a way that still made her heart skip. After all these years, the love between them remained strong, deepened by shared experiences and mutual growth. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Porter traced the faint scar near Zinnia's temple, the last visible reminder of her father's abuse. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly. "Your father?" Zinnia considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not often. I heard he died 2 winters ago. Drank himself to death, according to the letter Mrs. Peterson received from someone in Silver Creek." Porter nodded, his hand moving to stroke her hair. "I'm sorry," he said, "not for him but for you, for what you lost: the father you should have had but didn't." "I made peace with that long ago," Zinnia said, "and what I found is far more important than what I lost: you, the children. This life we've built. I wouldn't change anything, because it all led me here." Porter pulled her closer, his arms strong and gentle around her. "When I first saw you in town that day, with those bruises on your face, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. How you would fill this house with laughter and love. How you would make me happier than I ever thought possible." "It works both ways," Zinnia replied, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You saw me when I was at my lowest, my most broken, and you didn't pity me. You respected me. You gave me safety when I needed it most, and then, when I was ready, you gave me love." They fell silent, the years of their shared life flowing between them like a river: the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, all woven together into a tapestry of extraordinary ordinariness. A life built day by day, choice by choice, love by love. Outside, the Colorado night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. The moon rose over the ranch, the home they had created together, a sanctuary of peace and joy risen from the ashes of pain. Zinnia Garland Porter, once a battered young woman fleeing for her life, now a wife, mother, and respected rancher's partner, closed her eyes in contentment. Her father's bruises had long since faded, but the strength they had revealed in her remained, now matched by the strength of the love surrounding her, a love that had welcomed her not in spite of her past, but because of the courage it had taken to survive it. And in that love, she had found not just healing, but a life more full, more rich, more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream possible.